I'm a firm believer that that it wasn't God's plan that my abuse happened, but that he was able to take that and make something really good come out of it. And so the whole thing has just rolled and evolved. And I've always just sort of been running to keep up with what's happened. And I've always just prayed and said, God, you open the door and I'll walk through it. But the doors, and it started in the 80s just flying open as far as the request to talk and be on TV and radio and all of these things. And it just, it went and has continued to roll very fast.
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of I Love Being Sober. My name is Tim Westbrook, and I'm the CEO of Camelback Recovery here in the always sunny and always sober Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have helped thousands of people on their path to recovery. We started this show because there's so much misinformation about addiction treatment, mental illness, and recovery in general. There's so much more to recovery than just going to inpatient treatment, seeing a therapist, and going to 12-step meetings. All of those things are important, and AA saved my life. However, to find long-term recovery and live happy, joyous, and free, there's a lot more to it than just stopping the drinking, stopping the drugs, stopping the sex addiction, or stopping any addictive behavior for that matter. To live a new life, a person needs new, healthy lifestyle habits, amongst other things. Typically, this includes new eating habits, new sleeping habits, new exercise habits, new hobbies, new interests, new friends. Self-care becomes a priority, and the list goes on and on. Those are the types of things that we talk about here on the show. Today, I'm here with Marilyn Murray, and Marilyn Murray is the creator of the Murray Method, the Trauma Egg, and she's a pioneer in the field of trauma. She was one of the first people to speak publicly regarding sexual abuse beginning in 1981. Recognized internationally as an educator, theorist, author, columnist, and psychotherapist, she's regarded as a pioneer regarding the treatment of trauma and has taught her Murray Method theory and treatment modality since 1983. She is the originator of the Trauma Egg, a well-known therapeutic instrument regularly used in treatment centers throughout the United States and internationally. She's also the author of Prisoner at War and the Murray Method. Marilyn, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you here.
I'm delighted to be here, and I'm so proud of you and all that you're doing.
Thank you. I'm just grateful and honored to have you here on the show. So let's dig into it. What is the Murray Method?
The Murray Method, as you said already, is something I created about 40 years ago. But it is a method that encompasses how to do a whole different lifestyle and to create a new baseline for normal for yourself. And it incorporates working on your own personal issues, but also regarding relationships. So I'll explain a little more as we go along.
Okay. You know the questions. Okay. So what gives you the right to claim you are an expert on trauma and abuse?
Well, part of it is because of my own background in trauma, which I'll share a little more later. But as you mentioned earlier, I started in 1981 sharing my own story. And at the time in 1981, no one was talking about trauma. The only thing that they regarded much as trauma was PTSD, was things from Vietnam War or other war type things. And the word sex abuse just was not used at all. And so I became one of those that first started talking about it, and there were several others that came forward about the same time, and the whole thing started to roll in the 80s, and I was at the forefront of that.
Wow, so sex abuse was not even talked about, not even considered a thing?
Not in the general public at all. In fact, I used to give my own story, and I gave talks called No, Not Me. I Had a Perfect Childhood. And there would be anywhere from 200 to 600 people that would come, people driving long distances to come. And afterwards, I would stand at the the front, whether it was a university or a church or wherever, and people would line up literally down the aisle, even outside, waiting to
Wow.
talk to me. And almost everyone would say, I've never told this to anyone else, or I've told someone, maybe my parents or a pastor or a teacher, and they told me that I shouldn't talk about it. And so they would be, weeping and saying, this is the first time I've ever heard anybody give me permission to tell what happened to me. And so, and then I would stay for 3 or 4 days and counsel 15 hours a day for free to these people and talk to them about how to get therapy and how to do follow-up. So those were very explosive years, those early years.
Wow. Tell me a little about your personal story and how the Murray method was created.
Okay. Well, one of the things I talk about a lot with my clients and when I teach is what I call a baseline for normal. Because when you're a child, what's common and familiar you regard as normal, and you think if it's normal, it must be okay. You don't know any other option. And we carry that baseline for normal with us. And once you become an adult, especially if you're in therapy, then you look back and you say, what was good in there that I want to keep, but what were the things that I thought were normal and okay that really aren't so good. And so for me, my baseline for normal was Kansas, a very small farming town, Bible Belt. And in my town, the baseline for normal sort of was, what will other people think?
Okay.
Which is, I think, a lot of people, but
Yeah.
Image was very important. And there, no one dealt with negative issues at all. It was, you keep a smile on your face, you're very stoic. And my family had a lot of trauma, but they never discussed it. And my mother, when she was 17, saw her mother and 16-year-old sister burned to death in front of her in a fire that she thought was her fault. And my father's family came from Russia, and his mother was killed by lightning. She was inside the house when he was 7. And
Wow.
the family from Russia, lots and lots of trauma, while they were in Russia and afterwards with their family there. But those things were never talked about. I didn't even know those things till I became older. And so my baseline for normal was you don't ever talk about anything like that. So when I was 8 years old, unfortunately, I was the victim of a sexual abuse by some strangers. And there was nothing in my brain that knew how to process that. And so that was something that basically I stuffed in a box and stuck into a far corner of my brain. But I started
Now, how old were you?
8.
Okay.
Yeah. But I started having really violent nightmares and started to get really sick. And so that continued. And when I was in high school, it was my sickness kept me from being very active physically. And so I really concentrated instead on the intellect and became, valedictorian of my classes. And by the time I was a senior, was this sort of hard driving, perfectionistic, overachiever, workaholic already. And
but you got that excessive addictive personality.
Oh yeah. And so, but when at graduation time, it just so happened that my parents had some friends that were visiting from Prescott, Arizona, and they advised them to let me come to Prescott for the summer for health reasons, the clear mountain air and et cetera. So I did that, and I came. My parents, all they could afford to do was give me $15 and buy a one-way bus ticket. So I was 17, straight out of high school, and Prescott was the wild, wild west.
Okay.
I'd never seen a mountain, a cactus, a palm tree, a cowboy, an Indian. I'd never even seen a pair of real Levi's. So my baseline for normal just exploded, you can imagine. But I felt so much better there that I never went back to Kansas. And so my parents eventually even moved out to Arizona. But I married,
why Prescott?
uh, because this is where these friends of my parents lived in Prescott, and
Okay.
they invited me to come and and to be there, and I stayed with them for like 2 weeks until I got a job and a place to live and etc. But I loved Prescott, and then I married, had 2 daughters. We moved down here to Phoenix and to Scottsdale, and actually we moved down here in 1956. So I
Okay.
moved. I'm 85 now. I just had my 85th birthday. And
Wow. Congratulations. You can't tell that you're 85,
okay,
like,
thank you.
at all.
So I moved to Prescott in 54, down here in 56, to Scottsdale in 60, and we started a Western clothing store in Scottsdale, and then eventually started an art gallery in 68. So I started the very first art gallery in Scottsdale. And as you know, there's 120.
Wow. Oh, well, yeah. I mean, Scottsdale's like an art mecca now.
Yes, actually, my daughter and son-in-law had the Legacy Gallery, which is one of the best-known galleries in the country now. Still, so we're the oldest continuous family on Main Street in Scottsdale. Been there since 1963.
Wow. Okay.
Anyway, but I became a very successful art dealer. And everybody that looked at me thought that I had my life together because I had a beautiful home here in Paradise Valley, successful business. I was active in my church. Everything looked good. But my physical problems, instead of having asthma, which is what I had in Prescott, that it went away, I started having really severe headaches. And then I started having a lot of body pain everywhere, pain in my chest and my stomach and my back. And the doctors couldn't find out what was wrong with me. And so it got so bad that I became suicidal. And at the time in Scottsdale, nobody went to therapy unless you were certifiably psychotic.
Okay. It wasn't the norm.
No, definitely was not the baseline for normal. 40 years.
Right.
And especially not for somebody like me that looked so good, on the outside.
Right.
And so it looked like I had everything together. And fortunately, I had a close friend who had done some therapy at a treatment center in the San Francisco Bay Area. And it was one of the only places in the country at the time that had an intensive outpatient program like PCS does here now. And so she insisted that I also go there. And had she not insisted that, I absolutely would have died at age 44. And so I was 44 in 1980, and I went to that treatment and stayed a long time and worked not only on my sexual abuse, but on the fact that back then we didn't have the word codependency. It didn't exist in 1980, and a boundary was a fence. So
okay.
All the things that we, terms we use now, we didn't have. And so my therapist talked to me not only about my sexual abuse, but the fact that I was doing just enormous amounts of codependency caretaking of many people, and working excessively long hours and doing all of this. And he was just saying, you have to change your lifestyle. And I was really angry with him on that. I'm going like, what's wrong with my lifestyle? I'm doing the right things.
Right.
And so finally he got through to me that that my health depended upon that.
So you were not an alcoholic, you were not a drug addict, but you
were
codependent, but codependent workaholic before those things were even things, right? And okay, and you went to treatment, and it was an outpatient treatment program, not inpatient, correct?
Yeah, and it was an intensive program.
It was an intensive program. Okay, so I just want to point that out because a lot of people think that the treatment is for people that are addicted to drugs or alcohol, and that's not necessarily the case. You don't even think you would have lived if you didn't go to treatment to start working on your trauma and your abuse.
I know I wouldn't have. I would have either died by suicide, or the doctors told me that I was probably hours or days away from a massive heart attack or a stroke.
Okay.
because I was like holding down, all of these, not only from my sexual abuse, but from years of never, ever having dealt with negative issues ever,
Right. Right.
and I was 44 at the time. So obviously there were a lot of those things that I needed to deal with and did not. And so,
And you looked good on the outside. You looked
yeah,
like you had it together,
I
and
can
you
show you
couldn't tell. And
yeah,
yeah, yeah. And so, but good for you. I mean, being what, because that wasn't normal at that time, and now it's
not at all. Not
it's
at all.
much more normal for people to go seek help or treatment. And it doesn't have to be just because they're addicted to drugs or alcohol. It's codependency, it's abuse, and everybody has abuse. Everybody has abuse, everybody has trauma, and it's just what degree of abuse, what degree of trauma. So
What degree? Yeah, exactly. And so, but when I came back, like a lot of people wanted me back like I was before,
yeah,
and it was
the codependent workaholic.
yeah, we want you back like the way you were, but without the headache.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, and back then too, the other thing that wasn't common 40 years ago was all the things we know now about the mind-body connection, and how much, what goes on with emotionally, how much that affects your physical body and your physical health. They didn't understand all of that either. And
Right.
so when I was trying to explain that, well, it was all the things that I did that looked so good and that everybody loved, that was part of that was what was making me sick. And
Right.
so, anyway, I was very fortunate in finding a really good therapist here to do my follow-up, and it was Dr. Ralph Earl, who
Okay.
back when psychological counseling services was fairly new and wasn't the very large organization it is today.
Right.
But I was very fortunate, and he really encouraged me to go back to school and get my degree in psychology. And so I started to, and so I literally did that. And I ended up, because I had only gone to college just a very short time before we started our store, and I just didn't have time. I was very successful without it.
Right.
but I ended up doing 3 years of a BA, 2 years of a master's to a start of a PhD in 44 months.
Wow.
So I just hit the ground running and loved
You flew through it.
yeah. But then, and during that time, because I was high visibility in Scottsdale, I was asked then to share my story. And so I started like at ASU. Dr. Sandy Mason was head of one of the psych departments there, and I did several talks there. I did things at psychiatric hospitals, counseling centers, churches, women's groups, Rotary clubs, and as I said, was one of the first. And then I got picked up by radio and television, and then pretty soon I was traveling all over the country doing radio and TV. When I would do a national television show, they brought me my mail in sacks, big sacks, and it was just overwhelming. And so while I was in school, one of the things that Dr. Earl had encouraged me to do was to write out a theoretical concept of what happened with me, regarding my trauma, how I'd respond to it, and et cetera. So I started to write that out as actually one of my papers in a theoretical class. And so, but I thought it only applied to me. I was just trying to understand what happened to me. Why did I respond this way, and et cetera, and why did my body over the years have such a physiological response, et cetera. And so, fortunately, I had a professor who was a clinician who really encouraged me, and he and Dr. Earl both said, "Would you teach this emerging theory to us, because we think it would help us with some of our clients." So I did. And much to my surprise, they came back and said, this works with everybody, not just with you.
Yeah. Right.
So they encouraged me to widen it out and keep going. So I gradually, by then I was having my own clients and started to use it. But also during this time in those early 80s, like 82, 83, I was asked, because of Dr. Mason, he was the first one to do a sex offender treatment program in the Arizona prison system. And so I first started out at the juvenile prison out at Adobe Mountain, and then went down to Florence to the prison system there. And they told me I was the first rape victim to act as a therapist to convicted rapists and child molesters. And I did that work for 8 years, part-time pro bono.
Right. That's so speaking to I just want to speak to pro bono first. So a lot of the work that you've done, a lot of your speaking is all pro bono, right?
All pro bono.
Okay.
It was all pro bono.
And so I just like I know for me what I've learned is we all are seeking fulfillment, right? And how do we get fulfillment? We get fulfillment by helping other people.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And it's like before we learn that, it's take. Like I want money, I want cars, I want women, I want all these things, and then I learned, and I'm sure you learned as well. It's by being of service and by helping other people and by telling your story. You didn't have to receive monetary compensation to gain a huge amount of value out of all of those talks that you gave.
Yeah. Well, and as I mentioned to you earlier, when I gave those talks, there would be lines of people for hours afterwards lined up wanting to talk to me, weeping and saying to me, you're the first person I've ever been able to tell this to. And I've never been able to, or I have told somebody else, and they told me not to ever discuss it again. And so it was amazing that the response was just intense. And so one of the things that Dr. Earl and I discussed at great length, he said, and I just said to him, I'm feeling like it's almost unethical for me to continue to give all these talks, especially on national TV, when everybody's saying, where do I go for therapy? Where can I find somebody that knows how to treat trauma and how to do this? And the therapists weren't there. The therapists were there, but they weren't trained. And so I was really encouraged to really continue to develop my method and do training of therapists. So I started doing Murray method. I didn't call it Murray method back then. And actually Dr. Earl and his son, Dr. Marcus Earl, who is the director at PCS, were among my very first students. And so we did that in the early 80s, mid 80s. And then I also met Dr. Patrick Carnes, and he and Dr. Earl and I did lots of presentations together on the early days of sex addiction issues because of the work I was doing in the prison. That all combined together. So we did a lot of that in the 80s. And so I ended up then training therapists and seeing clients all through the 80s and the 90s. And then I started working. I started being asked to teach at a university here, Ottawa University, I'm sure. And they wanted to be one of the first universities in the country, or maybe even in the world, to offer a graduate program that offered a specialty and a degree where the diploma said specialty in the treatment of trauma, abuse, and deprivation. So I started that in 97 and taught there for 7 years. But I also, originally I had spent time as a therapist in California and only did intensive therapy. And at the time, PCS didn't have an intensive program, and Dr. Earl sent all of his clients to me in California. And of course, I had clients from many other places too, as a result of all my talks. But then he really encouraged me to come back to Phoenix. And so him, and along with my daughters, by that time were married. I had 3 grandkids. They wanted me back here. Yeah. And then Ottawa wanted me to back. So in 97, I moved back and started my private practice with Dr. Earl. the program at PCS intensive program took off, and I had come over here starting in '92 and did some follow-up work part-time. So the PCS intensive actually started about in '92 or '93, but it really began to roll, like in the late '90s, and now it's one of the best in the whole country, and I think probably one of the longest continuous ones in the country.
Right. So PCS started in 1974, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
When did they start So it started out as probably just a counseling office, and then when did they start specializing in sex addiction or sex abuse?
Well, you'd have to ask Dr. Earl of those to get them exact, but I know that
because it sounds like you were an integral part of that.
That he. Dr. Carnes wrote the first book on sex addiction, I think in '84. And I believe that Ralph and Dr. Greg Crow did their book on sex addiction that came out, I think, in '86. And so during those years were the times that and I started, at the prison in '82. And I know when Ralph and Greg were writing their book, we did lots of discussions about, of the things I was learning, with the men I was working with, and et cetera. So it all, it was in the mid '80s that all of that really took off and from then on in the whole country.
So what was it like, and you've kind of already answered this, but what was it like 40 years ago as one of the first people to speak publicly about trauma and abuse? I know that you had lines of people that were wondering where to get help after your talks. But what about, was there anybody out there that were putting down your talks? What was it like?
Well, I could talk a long time just about that question because the resistance came in several areas. For instance, I gave a lot of talks, a lot of places in churches and things, and I found that abuse issues in any type of family or organization that is very what we call endogenous, very tightly contained, where the children inside don't have the right for boundaries. Right. etc., then that's a setup for abuse issues to happen. That doesn't mean they're absolutely going to, but it's a setup for it. And so a lot of churches, that's not just churches, but synagogues or any type of religious organization or ethnic group like that has a lot of abuse issues. And so some of the leadership in those gave me some bad, hard feedback. Right. You mustn't talk about this. This will give the world the opportunity to criticize us, and et cetera. So that one,
right? Because remember, just like you said earlier, it's keep it quiet, don't talk about it.
Exactly.
It's like stuff it and put it in the corner and don't ever talk about it.
A lot of it was, like I said, the baseline for normal too.
Right.
Sex and sex abuse was not on people's baseline for normal at all.
Right.
Back then. And another thing would have been from the academic community. Everybody was not, I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of the majority were cognitive behavioral, strictly cognitive behavioral. I think that at ASU they were talking about calling it Skinner Hall.
Okay.
And so the idea of everything was you deal with today. You just deal with today. But the idea of going back and looking at trauma and looking at root causes and et cetera, got lots of pushback on that. And so and then like in the things that Dr. Mason was doing at ASU with the prison, the whole idea of a therapy for sex offenders was very new. And so there was pushback. And I think probably some of the most severe criticism I got was when I spoke at about 8 to 10 to 12 psychological conferences a year, was always doing from national conferences, and then regional ones and state conferences, different ones. And so I remember being at a big national conference. I can't remember who the sponsor was at the time, but
Right.
and when I would give my talk, I would always share a little of my own background, but then I would, one of the things that I do in my trainings, as well as with all my clients, is they do drawings. They do drawings. I always say that the person we're created to be, we're created, everybody has a pool of pain, which you just said, everybody has trauma of some kind.
Right.
Everybody has a defense mechanism, and how those three interact determine everything you do. And so I call the one you're created to be your original child, your pool of pain is your sobbing child, and your controlling child's defense mechanism. And I have everybody draw those as well as they draw their anger, aggression, and passive aggressiveness, and then draw who, as a healthy, balanced person, what would that look like? So I had literally thousands of photographs of those drawings that were really dynamite to see.
Wow.
Especially when you saw that these were from maybe sex offenders, or this was from a pastor, or all of the different ones. And so I would show those at those conferences, no names, of course, on that.
Right.
And they were always very, very impressed by them. But when I would share that I also worked with sex offenders, and that I found that all of them had been victimized severely, and so the whole concept of understanding how somebody is a victim and how somebody goes on to be victimizers to other people, but not that puts them in prison, and victimizers to themselves, because we all do victimizing of some type. And so anyhow, but and remember, this is also a time of very heavy women's movement. We'd come through all the civil rights and women's rights and things like that. And there would be women that would stand up in the audience and scream at me, and just say, "How dare you work with those monsters and these horrible, horrible men," and just be really raging. And so I had that a number of times like that. And one of the things I was always saying is that, and I still do today, this idea that gets stuck, whether it's in the media or in many people's attitude of having the victims are always female and the victimizers are always male, or the victims are always a certain ethnicity or a certain color or race, and the victimizers are always, another color or race. And I just not so.
Right. Not true.
No, I deal with everybody as, everybody is a valuable person. Everybody, no matter race, gender, color, and everybody has had some type of pain in their life. And so I just really have always pushed back on that. And I have been always a big advocate for anybody, male, female, no matter what color, of what's happened in their lives. But those were really, hard. And of course, when I was first starting out, it was like, who in the blank, blank, blank do you think you are?
Right.
To say this, and et cetera. And one of the things that Dr. Earl and I laugh, because he's the same age I am. He teases me, though I'm 6 months older than him. So he's 84 right now. I'm 85.
You guys are both young 84, young 85. I mean, it's amazing.
But I said the advantage of being our age is we don't have to put up with any of that BS anymore.
Right. And you lived through it.
Yeah. Well, and we could say, look, we're the older ones now that can say, look, we've been there, done that. Don't argue with me on this. I know. One of the things I always have my students say is, I know what I know.
Mhm.
And I know that I know what I know. This is what, I've experienced personally and with now literally thousands and thousands of students and clients. And so you're welcome to your opinion on certain things, but on these, I know that I know what I know.
Yeah. So let's go. I want to go back. So you talked about how everybody started out talking about or writing down um, their what did you call it? Their normal self, their
Their original
victimized,
child. Yeah,
their
the
original
original
child.
child, their sobbing child, and their controlling child. Yes.
Right. Now, is that kind of like the start of the Murray method? That's where everybody puts it on paper. They put
Yeah.
it on paper, and that's like the first time they get to see. I mean, it seems like that would be an eye-opening exercise
Very,
for people.
very, very, very. Yeah. And how I can't, people just say, well, did you copy those words from anybody else? And no, no.
Okay.
And because, see, when I did my therapy in 1980, at that time, I had never read a book on psychology. I didn't know anything about anything. I was what do they call, a clean blank slate.
Okay.
and
Uh-huh.
and so everything that I came up with came strictly out of my own experiences. And during my therapy, I did this very intensive therapy. And my book, Prisoner of Another War, which is available, they can
Yeah.
buy it online, it has a detail about that time if people are interested. But I went through a period where I literally couldn't function as an adult for a while. And so I was trying to explain to my therapist what was happening to me, and I came up with those terms. And so I said
Okay.
it was like I was this original child, and then when this abuse happened, I became this sobbing child. But then there was this part of me that kept saying, "No, no, no, you can't feel this. If you do, we're going to die." And
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
yeah, that was controlling all of this. And so I continued to. At first, when I wrote my thesis, my master's thesis on this, I remember telling my advisor, I said, I think I need to change these to more academic terms, like psycho-abidinal ego,
Yeah, yeah, right, 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 right.
Yeah. And she said, no, 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 no,
No,
no.
it's very, very basic. Like people understand it.
Exactly that.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Uh-huh.
she said to me, which I'll never forget, she said, good theory is this: it's easy to understand, it's easy to remember, it's easy to transfer and tell somebody else about, and
Yeah.
it works.
Mhm.
And she says, you've already done that. She said, don't mess with it. So I was so grateful because I've had lots of feedback. And plus, it translates easily into any language.
Yep.
You know,
Okay. There you go. There you go.
where anti-libidinal ego doesn't translate too well.
Right. Right, 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 right. Now, how were you able to get the Murray method to continue to grow and develop?
Well, I think that's something it wasn't intentional. It one of the things I always say is that I believe God can take any bad thing and make a good thing come from it.
Uh-huh.
And so, had my sexual abuse not happened, I'd be married today to a farmer in Kansas. you know, none
Okay.
of
Yeah.
my children, my grandchildren, my great grandchildren, none of that would exist. The Murray method, none of the things that have happened out of it would have happened. And so I'm a firm believer that that it wasn't God's plan that my abuse happened, but that He was able to take that and make something really good come out of it. And so the whole thing has just rolled and evolved. And I've always just sort of been running to keep up with what's happened. And I've always just prayed and said, God, you open the door and I'll walk through it. But the doors, and it started in the 80s just flying open as
Mhm.
far as the request to talk and be on TV and radio and all of these things. And it just, it went and has continued to roll very fast. And the, and I think probably one of the next questions you're going to ask me about is maybe internationally, but I was teaching at at the university here, and then as a result, I was asked to teach for an international university.
Mm-hmm.
So, would you like for me to go ahead and talk on that?
Yeah. Let's talk about that. I mean, internationally and in countries like the USSR or the former USSR, and so let's talk about that.
Okay, so what happened then? Well, I think being, speaking what you talked about, how to develop and grow, like speaking at these various, all of these different formats, everything, I constantly was getting questions, and every time I would get questions about, well, how does this apply to da 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 da, or even with my clients or students, that would force me to push the method farther, or I would get clients that had problems on something, or especially like in working in relationships. So I was constantly coming up with new instruments and things to answer those questions, and many complexities. But I was asked to teach for an international university, and started doing some things, around the world. I have probably students, I think, from 40 some countries now.
Wow.
But this international university asked me to go to Kyiv, Ukraine in 2001. And since my family, as I said, my father's family came from Russia, I was really interested to do that. And then as a result of that, someone else asked me to come to Moscow, Russia in 2002. And I was really eager to do that because I really wanted to go and see. I knew the names of my grandparents' villages, and I wanted to go and do that. And so I was to teach. Actually, you'd be interested. It was a program that was started in Russia, that was started by Americans, but staffed by a lot of Russians, on how to treat addictions, especially alcohol and drugs. And this was one of the very first in Russia. And see, they didn't even have AA there till 1989.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Really, really do. So because
Yeah.
none of that was allowed. See, because during the Soviet Union, they said, we're a perfect country. Trauma doesn't happen here. Abuse doesn't happen. We have no addictions. We're perfect. And so consequently, anybody that was trained to be a therapist was never trained on how to deal with any of those things. And
Wow.
so when the Soviet system fell in 91, a number of people from America, from the West in general, and throughout Europe and England and all, went to Russia and offered to help teach how to do that. And so this particular program was, I think it was a 6 or 8 week program on how to treat alcohol and drug addiction. And so everybody that was psychologists, psychiatrists, medical doctors, because over there, medical doctors were major in treatment of that. And then all kinds of therapists, drug and alcohol counselors, clergy, psych professors, all of those were in this class. And it was a large class, and they came from all over Russia for this. And so they asked me to teach 1 week on trauma. And so the man that was running the program's wife had been to one of my classes at Ottawa University. And so that's how they knew that this would be good for this. And so anyhow, when I finished, they came to me, a number of the students, and said, we are so happy that we've had all this, people coming here for the last 11 years to help us with addictions, but nobody has touched trauma. And they said, we have, 70 years of the Soviet system. And they said, every family lost people during World War II, every family. Right. And they said, every family lost people to Stalin. They were either killed outright, they starved to death, they were sent to gulag prisons, which are like work concentration camps. And so they said every family has that. And plus all the traumas today, all the things that are going.
Right.
Hey,
Well,
and
and many people say that all addiction stems from trauma.
yeah. Oh, I could go on and on and on about that one. Yeah.
Right.
And so they said, would you please stay? So I stayed. So I started, um, for the first 11 years, it was like I lived in Russia and visited here. I was there 7 months, 5 months. So
Okay.
I was there January, February, May, June, July, September, October. And so for the first 2 years, I still tried to work at PCS and still tried to teach at Ottawa for those
Okay.
5 months I was here. And then that got crazy. I
I can
just,
imagine.
yeah, do that because I was getting busier and busier over there. And so talking to Ralph and Marcus, they both, encouraged me to just, to take care of my health. And so I retired from PCS, retired from Ottawa, and then just started working full time. And I started a small 501c3 called Health Restoration International, and so then for the next 11 years I did that, and then I now have six beautiful great grandchildren, and
Awesome.
another one due in February, going to be 7. And I like to practice what I preach, and so I wanted to spend time with those little ones. And so when the first 2 were born 9 years ago, then I decided to change my schedule. And so since 2013, what I do is I go 1 time a year instead of 3 times, and I stay 4 months. I stay May, June, July, August, or June, July, August, September. And so I was doing that until last year was the first time in 18 years I had not been living in Russia. So
Wow.
I was so upset, of course, not being able to go. The country was closed and is still closed this year. So they just reopened. I'm really planning and hoping to go this coming May. But I could talk to you. If you ever wanted me to just come back and do a talk on Russia, I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, I know how passionate you are about Russia and about all the work that you get to do over there.
Yeah, I personally taught over 3,000 students now, and we have a Murray Method International Center in Moscow, one in Ukraine, and one in Tajikistan.
Okay. I've never heard of Tajikistan.
It's right, if you know where Afghanistan is, Tajikistan lays right on the top of Afghanistan. And so that's a real critical area right now with all of what's going on in Afghanistan. They're only from the capital of Tajikistan to Kabul in Afghanistan, where all the fighting's going on, is 352 miles. So it's it's a very dangerous area. And so we're really concerned about what's happening there. But with my students over there, I've been very fortunate that I have a marvelous group now of Murray Method certified instructors that teach all over, and they just blow my mind. They are so good at what they do. Russians are very talented and creative, from what we used to call right brain, right hemisphere, and they when they teach, I want to burn my PowerPoints. Like, my stuff looks so basic compared to theirs. They do all kinds of plays and skits and just amazing things. So they of course, with all of the problems that we've been having with COVID, that has hit really bad there, and so they're doing a lot of online things, but I'm very proud of them. I could die tomorrow and the work in Russia would still go on really well. And so it's amazing.
That is amazing. So tell me about the trauma egg. You're the creator of the trauma. You're the creator of the trauma egg. The trauma egg is used all over the country, all over the world by therapists everywhere. And so it's famous, and you're the creator of it. So tell me about the trauma egg.
Okay, well, I have to tell you the funny story about the trauma egg and how it got started. Was that when I wrote my thesis about trauma and what happens, when this original child is being traumatized, and these various traumas just, it's like a little sliver cut away, or a bigger slice, and et cetera. Well, so when I wrote my thesis, of course, you can tell how old it was because it was before computers. I had to do it on a typewriter, and so I had all these diagrams, and they were circles, and so I used the old-fashioned compass, and I had to hand draw all these circles and et cetera, but they were perfect circles. So that was my thesis. Okay. But when I decided that I would teach it to my clients, I went and bought a big easel pad. Well, an easel pad is, longer and narrower. Okay. It's more a rectangle. Okay. And so I remember really clearly, I had this female client, and I only did intensives. I didn't see clients once a week. So they came, I saw one client in the morning for 4 hours, one client in the afternoon for 4 hours, for 5 days a week for 3 weeks. And so right at the very first, I decided I was going to have them do this exercise. I didn't know what to call it. And so I sat on the floor with her with this big easel pad and, a packet of pens. And so I looked at this, and so I started to draw a circle. But because of the way the pad was, it ended up being an oval. So I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, oh, that kind of looks like an egg. And so I thought, okay, let's talk about what kind of nest you were born into. So I said, was the nest satin ribbon and rose petals, or was it a bunch of prickles? And so we talked about that, and I added those things at the bottom, little things about mom and dad and older brothers or sisters, and et cetera. And then I said, well, now let's talk about various painful things that have happened. And so I started to draw lines across it. And the width of the line denoted how much, what the intensity of the pain was. And so after we did this whole thing, filled this whole pad up, clear to the top, I stood back and I said, wow, that looks like an egg full of trauma, doesn't it? Yeah. And so it started being called a trauma egg. Okay. So now fast forward to today. During these days of being in Russia, now there we use wallpaper. And so, which is really, they don't have easel pads. So actually God arranged this, because the wallpaper is what we need there, because one pad of, easel pad doesn't do it for them. Most of when I do my classes there, the trauma eggs are ceiling to floor,
wow.
And some out into the middle of the room. I've had trauma eggs that are 20 feet long. And what's the shocking thing is that when they do that, the things on there, they've never, ever discussed. Because remember, it's all new. It's all new. And I'll have a large room of 40 people with the walls papered ceiling to floor with paint. And it is, you just can't imagine. I could go on for hours and show pictures and things of what that's like for them. And it's shocking, because they had no idea that, because during Soviet times, they were never allowed to talk. And so you got severely punished or shot or put in prison if you discussed any of these painful things. And so even though the Soviet system has been gone a long time, it's still their baseline for normal not to talk. And so this is, for most of them, it's their first time they've ever had that experience and opportunity to do that. So it's very, very powerful. So anyway, but getting back to the fact of that these trauma, and so those don't look so much like eggs. They're just these long lips. But the ones that we have here are, definitely look like at PCS when we do intensives there. Quite often there'll be somebody, especially somebody who's older, that we use several sheets of paper simply because they have more years of things to put in. But the majority probably are like one sheet very full. And so I still teach my Murray method things here in the States, not just in Russia. And in fact, I'm going to lead this weekend for Nashville. I'll be doing a level one. I'm at branches in Nashville, and so I give those regularly. So I had a woman who was a CSAT therapist, and do most of your clients all know what a CSAT is? And probably, okay.
Certified sex addiction therapist.
Okay, yes. And so all CSATs, Pat Carnes has everybody do a trauma egg. So
Okay.
everybody knows what a trauma egg is. Okay.
Right.
And so this woman that was coming to do my training was a CSAT. And so she laughed and she said to me, she said, Marilyn, I have to tell you a funny story. She said, I was at a CSAT conference recently. And at lunchtime, she said, I happened to walk by a group of CSAT therapists who were having this very intense, deep philosophical discussion on why it's called a trauma egg.
Okay.
Said, I wanted to just say to them, it's just the size of the paper.
You're like, no, yeah.
And so I said, well, as with Freudian things, they say sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
Yeah.
And so if you ever hear this deep philosophical discussion, why it's called a trauma egg, it's just the size of the paper.
It's just the size. It's just because it was an easel pad. Now I know. I actually didn't know that story, so it was good to hear how the trauma egg was created.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's such an amazing exercise for people to get all of their trauma on paper. And it's like once they start writing, it all flows typically.
Well, and one of the things, a lot of people will ask me why I just started that too. One of the things was back 40 years ago when I did my therapy, I was asked to do a timeline. And I remember saying to my therapist, how can something that happened way, way, way back here influence what I am doing way, way, way out here? It didn't make sense. They were so far apart. And so I said, we don't really experience life horizontally. We experience life vertically, and how each thing that you do, one stacks upon the other and they bleed through. And so that's by doing that exercise where you are stacking everything upon each other. I know with the trauma egg, when I did my intensives, the 3-week intensives, I always would suggest that my clients on the last day invite like a spouse or a relative or a close friend or somebody to come. And we spent the last afternoon with them sharing all their drawings and their trauma egg with this person. And so that was always very powerful. And so I remember one husband saying to his wife, everything on here you have told me, but I've heard them in bits and pieces over 25 years. And he said, I've never thought about, seeing them like this, one on top of the other. He said, now it's so easy for me to understand why you do what you do. He said, I can see now why when I do da 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 da, but of course, look at it. It activates this and this and this and this. So it's always really helpful. And I suggest very often that my clients and students share their trauma eggs with their adult children, because their trauma eggs are their children's nests.
Okay.
Makes sense. Like I would give my right arm to have seen my parents' trauma eggs, because there's so much I know that went on in their life that, of course, was never discussed. And it helps us understand and to have more empathy and compassion for others. And so one of the things that I would sort of like to close with as we're ending today is that think about the people that you dislike the most, the people that drive you crazy, the people that are like fingernails on the blackboard with you, whether they're, close people or people you work with or just somebody that you read about on the news. And instead of just raging and allowing that to upset you, just think, I wonder what their trauma egg looks like.
Wow.
When you do that,
It tells the story. It's like,
it makes all the difference in the world. And I always just said the only way I was able to do the work that I did in the prisons was because seeing their trauma eggs and knowing what went on with them, you go, oh, well, of course. Now I understand why you do what you do. Yeah.
right.
And so
that kind of goes along with not taking things personally.
Yeah. And the thing is, people didn't pop out of the womb a victimizer.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I love to be able to see everybody's original child, that child that was buried underneath that trauma egg, and to help bring that out in them. That's a real joy to me to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's amazing. We're coming up on the hour here, and Marilyn, such a pleasure to have you here and to speak with you and to learn more about the Murray method and the trauma egg and all of the stuff that we talked about today. How can people find you if they want to learn more about you, if they want to learn more about the Murray method or any of your teachings or where you're speaking? How can people find out more about you?
MurrayMethod.com, MurrayMethod.com. Have that a good website, and we have my schedule is on there, and I have a group of 8 or 10 videos that are of different things of my Murray method that are available. And there are also, in addition, I have quite a few videos on there that are free that anybody could go on, and we'll have this podcast linked on there.
Okay, awesome.
But that we have some others that are for that you can purchase, but they're very nominally priced. And then I have 2 books, as I said, Prisoner of Another War and The Murray Method, both available. And you can order them, on the website. You can just click; it'll take you right to them on Amazon. Also on the website, there's an info place where an email that they can contact me if they're interested in coming to any of my classes.
Awesome.
Because I have classes for the general public as well as for training professionals.
Perfect. Awesome. Marilyn, thanks again so much. I appreciate you.
Delight to be here, and I'm really proud of you and what you're doing. This was a pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much.